So I was a freelance artist, writer, director, performer based in New York for about 16 years. Um, and at a certain point in my career, I'd done a lot of work in a lot of different contexts, but some of the contexts are things like certain classrooms and prisons and things like that. And I had done some work. I worked a lot at a Latino theater there, INTAR, Hispanic American Arts Center in New York. And I collaborated on a couple things with a puppeteer named Ralph Lee. Ralph Lee himself is sort of a brilliant artist. He had come out of Bread and Puppet, I believe, um, and then had his own theater, company in New York for many, many years. He was one of the founders of the Halloween parade in the village and whatnot. At any rate, he had been working with sort of a long story, but he had been working with for many years a writers collective in Chiapas, Mexico, in San Cristobal de las Casas, and a Mayan writers collective, and they had been creating large-scale puppet theater that they were touring around, mostly to towns and villages in the highlands of Chiapas, but also other contexts. And he'd been creating about one show a year with them, and in the collective, a desire to do more acting and less sort of big pageant puppeteering was arising. And so Ralph took me out for coffee and he said, "Look, I don't know anything about acting. Would you be interested in going in my stead and creating a play with them that was more of a theater piece?" And it sounded cool, so I got in touch with them, and a lot of back and forth. But I wound up going to Chiapas, and we created this piece. And then, in Mayan culture, decisions are made through consensus. It's a collective decision-making process. So it was quite, it's painstaking process, because we sort of collectively created the piece step by step. It was a remarkable experience. And these were, of course, not, well, maybe not of course, but they were not trained in any sort of formal sense as we might think of training. They were certainly learning it as they did it. And in the piece, the collective at that time, there were 3 women in it and probably about 7 or 8 men. And so as we were creating the piece, it was based on Mayan stories about origins. And as we created the piece, there were 3 sort of crux moments, 3 sort of knots in the play. And, I sort of function as director slash dramaturg. And in a sort of... for purely aesthetic, practical, structural reasons, it wound up that the 3 women sort of each occupied one of those knots. So there was a moment in the play where a woman sort of sang the world into being. There was a moment in play where another woman, Leticia, performed sort of birth and gave birth to the Jaguar twins, and we made this really fun moment of it with a lot of vocal stuff happening, and the whole thing, and they burst out from between her legs, and it was very fun. And then at the end, Chenda spoke to the audience and sort of said, essentially it was a manifesto, a short manifesto, and this is why we did this piece, and this is what we want to see happen in our communities. And she spoke it in Tzotzil, Celtal, and then in Spanish. And again, we did this for purely, just to make it happen. I was also working at the time, while I was in Chiapas, I'd hooked up with this Mayan women's collective, also a theater collective called FOMA, Fortaleza de la Mujer Maya, Strength of the Mayan Woman. And in the mornings, I was doing some theater workshops with them, because I was working with the other company in the afternoons and evenings. And so I invited them to come see the show once we had it up, so they could see it before they took it on tour. And so they came, and a few other people came. And as always, you're wondering what the response is going to be. I think if we did the piece, say here or there, it would be very nice. People would respond positively to it. It would seem beautiful and interesting and all those lovely things. It was fairly simple in the complex way that you try to make things simple, and it was quite lovely. But I was not prepared for sort of the response people had to it when we did it in that context. And, there was clearly something happening in the audience, right, that I had a hard time decoding. And, after the show, people were weeping. And I didn't really understand what the thing was. But, particularly for the women in the audience, so not solely, the act of a woman on stage at that time publicly doing things like sing, like perform birth, which was transgressive and radical in their context, and then that she was the person who spoke in Tzotzil and Tzeltzal, not just Spanish, that manifesto, looking people in the eye and speaking from a public platform. Those were sort of radical acts that were transformative for those people, and aesthetically really exciting. It made them really excited about the stories and up the ante on the drama of it. And I worked with them again and had some similar experiences, and I was very interested in what that is, like what it is to create a aesthetic experience that is so particular to the local and to the active, present, passionate concerns of people that it ups the ante on that aesthetic experience, and what it is to have people who bring their authenticity of experience to the table in performing. Became something that I was even more about how I could have more of that practice in my life and how I could pursue that. And so that certainly caused me to make some changes in what I was prioritizing and think about the context I was working in. And a couple years later, the opportunity to the founder of the company, Bill Rausch, stepped down and they started a national search, and they reached out to me for this possibility of throwing my hat in the ring to possibly be the artistic director. And sort of the experience that I had in Chiapas, among others, led me to feel like it might be a really good match. I had seen Cornerstone's work a couple of times over the years and was interested in it, and felt like the kind of engagement and the kind of process they had would create opportunities like the one I had in Chiapas and to engage with a group of people who were like-minded. And so I did, and I wound up being offered the job and taking it, and it has in fact proven to be the case. It's a little boring, but it's interesting that this notion that there is some sort of line between quality and not, or what quality might mean, basically meaning that it's prettily packaged and that everybody speaks a certain way and walks a certain way and knows certain rules, is, I think, is a way of sort of protecting a kind of cultural hegemony, but I don't really think it's actually speaking to the experience people are having watching it, and what, in my view, art does at its best, which is change how we think about things, change how we feel, surprise us into sort of confronting previously unexpected places of empathy and recognizing ourselves in others. I mean, I don't think excellent. I mean, I've seen well-crafted stuff that does do that. I don't think I don't think it is. It's not necessarily a barrier, but it's not the same thing.
Sure.
And so I guess it's been more for me about confronting other people's preconceptions of what that is. I mean, certainly in doing the work, I confront my own stupid preconceptions all the time. Like we're going to work with a given community, and I find myself stupidly having assumptions about people and about the community that are, of course, blown out of the water as soon as you really engage with people. You have to break through typing and break through assumption in order to achieve a breakthrough, to achieve, and in whatever context, right? So, on some level, Molière was doing that by creating these ridiculous caricatures that actually broke through people's understanding of what the structures around them meant. And by the same token, I think in creating work in the context of communities that are perhaps otherwise not as likely to be on a cultural platform, on that kind of in that kind of context, you start to break down assumptions you make. Your brain is constantly, it feels to me, trying to create types so you can make simple decisions in order to survive, right? And you see stripes and you think tiger, and so I think trying to constantly breaking through our tendency to see type is I think really crucial, and by engaging in a process with somebody, you as soon as you start to understand their complexity, the type falls away. I'm making certain assumptions, and then assumptions are being made about the assumptions I'm making, and and vice versa, right? And so it's and the only thing you can really do is be in a room, listen to each other, and engage in a process, I think. We landed on this notion of hunger. I think, in California, it's hard, and not unlike other places, but in California, it feels this notion of resources, dwindling resources, is particularly acute. With the drought, which even then was a drought was on our minds, although it wasn't as acute as it is now. And And at the same time, Los Angeles is a place of tremendous abundance, like just like a lot of wealth and a lot of abundance. And in the Central Valley in California, I think it's like 60% of agricultural products that feed the United States come from the Central Valley of California. It's a huge amount, percentage. And so you're confronted by this, and of course we have tremendous poverty in LA as well as, so the contrasts are really interesting. And so we, I think also talked about people's personal journeys with this notion of times that we've been hungry, and also grappling with notions of food in terms of health and in terms of body image and things like that. All those conversations culminated in this notion of doing. At first, we were talking about doing a cycle that looked at food or looked at resources, but the notion of hunger seemed much more active. And it's a need. It's something that motivates you to do things, and so that became the word around which we started to sort of. It's a pretty ambitious cycle. It's 9 plays, and it spans the state. We did one that was specifically. We're about 2 blocks or 3 blocks from the Skid Row community here, where our offices are. Los Angeles has the biggest Skid Row in the United States. Mm-hmm. There has been a sort of concentrating of the population of homeless in the center of downtown that's been going on for many, many years. Some of that feels a little bit sinister in terms of people actually being moved into that part of town, and some of it has been a little bit more insidious in the sense that it's been made. So the service organizations are there, and then the city government makes it possible for more service organizations to be there. So the services are clustered there. Some are religious, some are secular, but there's a tremendous cluster. So, but anyway, so we did a project in the Skid Row community called Love on San Pedro. We performed it at the Los Angeles Mission on one of their floors in their gym, actually. And so that piece was looking at homelessness and people who. We're struggling on a day-to-day basis with hunger, and we had a cast of, I think it was about 25, 30 people, something like that. 1, 2, 3 of them who were professional actors, I think it was 3, and then the rest were folks from the community. And so it was dealing very directly with the impact of poverty and also institutionalized racism on people's lives. And at the same time, it was a romantic comedy.
Why not?
Yeah. So, we wanted to do something that subverted people's expectations of what it would be. So, although there were a lot of fairly heavy things that went on in the play, one of the central story was actually a love affair between two people who live in that neighborhood, and it was quite beautiful. So we get the lion's share of our funding from private foundations. We get, as most companies in the United States, a fairly small but appreciated amount from the government. But government funding is pretty low here in the United States, as I'm sure you've heard from other people. So we get some funding from the federal government and some from the city and county governments. The state of California does not have an arts council, or it does have an arts council, but it doesn't have any funding. So we get very little, if anything, from the state. And then, so mostly it's private foundations. We have a good group of individual donors that we are trying to grow with limited success. We do often do some sort of event every year, and that provides some income from individuals. We have a active and generous board, and then our ticket sales are negligible in terms of income. It's pay what you can. And we tend to work in underserved neighborhoods, so right. Ticket sales is not where it comes from. We do have a couple pedagogical opportunities. We have an institute that's a summer-long residency. People spend a month with us, and then we have some 2-day intensives, 2-day opportunities as well. And those provide a little bit of income. Not enough to actually pay for the actual thing we're doing, but it's a little income. And then we do some. For about the last 8 years or so, we have been doing client-based work, and that has upped our earned income. So we've worked with corporations and larger not-for-profits to create programs for them, right, based on our methodology. And the constant conversation, right? Yeah. What is the quantitative impact you guys are having and what is qualitative impact, I suppose, too.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly talking about that and trying to come up with better ways to sort of put numbers to it. While at the same time, I push back against that notion of some sort of easy quantifying of that kind of impact. So it's sort of a two-part conversation, right? But we've talked to a lot of consultants and are looking to figure out how to at least put some numbers to the kind of impact we think we're having and we hope to have.
Yeah.
I think a lot of theater, much like a lot of institutionalized art, is used to strengthen and uphold and reinforce, received ideas, and are used to, to strengthen ultimately oppressive structures, right? So, I mean, in general, and then I think there are people who use the power of the public platform that is theater to challenge those narratives and to not only suggest but assert alternative narratives and histories and strengthen give a voice more power and strength by giving it a platform from which to speak, whether it's our own voice or the voices of our colleagues and collaborators. And so I think theater has been engaged in that dynamic between the work that is done to sort of oppress and the work that is done to sort of be in opposition to that oppression. So it's very powerful to create a piece of theater in a parking lot of a Home Depot. A Home Depot here in the United States is where undocumented workers will just hang out trying to get work, right? To go work at somebody's house or something. So to turn that into a place where culture is happening, where stories are being told, where something identity is being asserted versus anonymity is really powerful and subverts people's notions of who those people are or what they might be about. And so, I think those two things live in opposition to each other and probably always will. I mean, I think for me, what's really important, certainly about how what I do here at Cornerstone, I guess in other places, is at the end of the day, I do strongly feel that I'm an artist and interested in the aesthetic impact of the work, and I'm not so much an activist. And I guess that contradicts what I was just talking about. But I feel like I think in the work we do here, one of the things we propose is by doing the work that is the best possible work we can be. I don't feel like I'm compromising on the work I do here versus the work I do somewhere else. I think engagement held equally high as any sort of aesthetic sort of exploration, and held together and done with the equal rigor is not a compromise. Is actually the path towards making the best possible work. And so, but at the end of the day, like if I wanted to change the world in an immediate way, I don't know, I'd go out in the street and demonstrate, or I'd join a campaign, or I'd throw a rock through a window or something, right? I don't think theater is so likely to do that. I think theater is more akin to movement building and will change the cultural conversation of the long term. And I think that is ultimately more powerful and impactful. And it does that by creating really exciting moments that lead to people having just really being fucking entertained and having these sort of aesthetic breakthrough moments. Do you know what I mean? If you're lucky, and being swept up by unexpected beauty. And so that is for me at the center of what I aspire to achieve at any rate.